Hey everyone, Scott Hansen here from NFL Red Zone. I hope you're checking out 1 hour of 5 Yard Rush, one of the best podcasts on NFL football in the UK.
Yo, what's happening, Rush Nation? We're back at it again. It's a sunny Tuesday this side of the pond, or England, if you're listening at home. Great day to be here. And it's an international show, guys. We thought we've had enough of the Americans on the show. Let's bring somebody else on. But before we get to today's guest, Murph, how you doing, mate?
Yeah, doing well, mate. Not bad. It's another Tuesday. It's sunny, which you can't ever moan about. Arsenal in an FA Cup final yet again. You know, nice things do happen if you wait patiently and long enough.
Well, Tampa, if you wait long enough, something might happen again.
Listen, I'm not counting my chickens on Tampa. I've said this time and time again. I didn't think we'd get Brady because nice things happen and we get Brady and there's a global pandemic. I'm not going to keep going over it. It would not shock me that the season is cancelled because the Tampa Bay Buccaneers have Tom Brady. I've said it time and time again.
Yeah, well, I know somebody who's pretty happy about Brady being a Buccaneer now, as he's a Bills fan, today's guest. But, when we think of accuracy, being British, we think of Robin Hood or, that sort of thing. And today's guest is pretty much takes Robin Hood, throws him in the bin and then says, see you later, pal. Because we're talking about the reigning Fantasy Pros champion for most accurate expert for rankings. 7 top 10 finishes in the past 8 years, which is phenomenal, to say the least. It's Justin Boone, everybody. Justin, welcome to 5 Yard Rush, buddy. How you doing?
I'm doing great. I appreciate you guys having me. And kind of like you touched on off the top there, I'm so used to being the outsider as the Canadian, always talking to the Americans about football. So it's nice to be talking to somebody else who's outside of America here.
That's it. There's enough of us now. I feel like we're building some momentum to take over and invade. You went on the inside route, so you're already kind of in and established. Well, let's be honest, you're beating the Americans at their own game in terms of being the most accurate ranker on the planet right now. So that's another skill. And then Gary Hadar, the Scott Fishbowl champion, he was born in the UK. So I feel like we're making those inroads. In a couple of years, it's all going to be Canada and Britain, and the US will be left behind.
Oh, you got to bring up Gary. That's a bad memory for me because I was in the same division as Gary in Scott Fishbowl last year. I won the division. We met again in the semifinals in our semifinal group, and I had the lead of the whole group until Monday night. He came back. He had Michael Thomas going, and he came back and passed me and booked his ticket to the final and then went on to win it all. So it was pretty awesome for him. It was cool to see somebody out of our division win it all, but I wish it would have been me.
Oh, absolutely. Well, I think this year's your year. I was looking at someone's projections, and they rated your SFBX roster number 1. I mean, you must be used to winning all the time anyway at everything.
Yeah, that one's not totally a win. Like, I feel like every year there's people who do those sort of, after Scott Fishbowl drafts, who kind of won the whole thing. And I feel like most years I'm the opposite. Most years I'm ranked way low and I'm trying to justify to myself, no, my team's actually good. It's not as bad as this is telling me. And this year when that popped up, I was actually kind of shocked. Like, whoa, I'm projected in. It's Matt Spencer, I believe is his name, who did it. And it's just one guy's projection. So, take that for what it is. But yeah, it was nice to finish on top of those, and we'll see what actually happens.
That's it. It's definitely the way to roll. It's awesome.
Can't be a bad thing, right?
No, well, that's it. Well, you say that. How often does the guy who's projected to be number 1 win?
This is true.
I think last year we were projected around about 900, 800 or so. I think in scoring in the season, we were just outside the top 100. So, and then we were playing half the time with 1 QB because we lost Nick Foles early. And then, yeah, we were struggling with QBs for some time, but it worked out all right until Darius Slayton's big week eliminated us in the quarters, which was a bit irritating. We were like, all good. We're like, yeah, we're in the semis. It's fine. Darius Slayton, Monday Night Football. Same thing as what happened to you. Just goes off for a casual 56-point week. Oh, right. There we go. 2 people had him. We went from 9th to 11th.
Well, hopefully we'll meet in the final of Scott Fishbowl this year.
That'd be great because I know Gary's listening. And Gary, I'm just letting you know now. You're a good friend. I love you to pieces, and we co-own a dynasty team. You're on our sort of Ryder Cup team, and that's great. And we'll win a lot of things together. But I need to just sort of eliminate you from the SFBX. So don't no hard feelings. But anyway, enough about all of this. I'm really interested in having you on. It's been listening to your shows for a long time, and thought it'd be really interesting just to understand a little bit how you got the gig, how you went from being a Canadian to being a
He's
fan
still
to
Canadian.
well, yeah, he is, and with pride to now being the talking about fantasy football, working for the Score, and getting paid to do this for a living.
It was kind of a long, strange road. I don't know how much detail you want me to go into. I was just on the Game Changers podcast with Dan Harris a few weeks back, and he that whole show was just about going all the way through your history, kind of how you got into fantasy football. But for me, it really started in high school. I started playing football for the first time in high school, and at that point, every other sport just fell off. I was playing hockey. I was playing soccer for us, or football, as you guys I'm sure call it. And all those sports kind of went away once I had discovered American football. I didn't think that I would end up with a job in the industry at that point. When I went to school for philosophy. I eventually switched over and went for journalism. And at that point, I was like, I think I could do sports. I think I could write about sports for a living. And I got lucky when I came out of school. My internship was with the Hamilton Tiger Cats in the Canadian Football League. And
Cool.
I don't know if you guys know them, but
Yeah,
Johnny Manziel got signed with them a couple years ago for a brief stint. So
we
got
have
a little bit of notoriety.
Their special teams coach is a guy who does the coverage of games here, Jeff Reinbold.
Okay, awesome.
So he does. He's their special teams coach currently. They went to the Grey Cup finals last year, didn't they? And didn't quite get there, but had the best record. And yeah, Jeff's been on our podcast a few times, and we had him talking about the Tiger Cats. So that's
Nice.
a really neat little link.
Well, when I was with them, they weren't going to Grey Cups. They were very bad for those few years. So it made my job kind of tough. I was the beat writer for the team, essentially. And it was very difficult when they were down 3 touchdowns in the first quarter, trying to come up with some nice things to say about the team. But it gave me great insight because I got to spend time in the locker room, around players, coaches, the medical staff, the front office. I got to see really how an organization works. And there's a lot you learn about how certain players approach their job and how some maybe don't do as much as they should, how about coaches or the medical staff and what they see and how they react to things. So it was so valuable for me. And it's stuff that when we're trying to decipher coach speak now, I can look at some of that stuff when players give quotes too and go, you know what, I actually think this is what he means because I've kind of seen that happen before. So it's been very, very valuable for me during my career. I was there for 2 or 3 years. And then I got hired by what's essentially Canadian ESPN. It's TSN. When I went there, their big thing, it's Canadian, so it's hockey, a lot of that stuff. But I was able to take over the NFL section there after a few months. And from there, I think a year or two in, I started to do some fantasy content and started to post my rankings. I found Fantasy Pros and was like, I wonder if they'll let me compete in this. I know I'm Canadian and, I just kind of got into doing the fantasy stuff, but I'd been playing in fantasy leagues for a long time at that point. I'd been doing my own rankings just for myself at that point, but this was the first time I was getting a chance to do it professionally. And Fantasy Pros let me join. You had to be, an analyst in the industry, and I had the TSN backing there. So I just didn't want to make a fool of myself. I wanted to see where I stacked up against, some of the best in the industry. And that first year I came in 8th and I was kind of surprised, but at that point I was also like, wait a minute, maybe I could actually win this thing. And from there, it's just been great.
It's awesome.
Yeah, that's good. How, with your rankings, obviously you did it for yourself. Was there a reason you did it for yourself, or did you just, what was the process into you getting into ranking for yourself initially and then doing it for?
I am super, super competitive. So when I started playing in fantasy leagues, I'll be honest, my friends growing up, they were not very good fantasy players. And I probably wasn't very good back then either. But I had some friends making some very, very questionable plays. So it was kind of easy for me to do well in some of those leagues, which probably made me even hungrier, right? Because I was doing so well. It was like, wait a minute, I'm good at this. And it made me want to get better. So I was putting the rankings together because I wanted my teams to be as good as they could be. And I'd look around the industry and I'd disagree with people's rankings out there. And I didn't really, understand why they'd rank a certain player where they did. So I wanted to see, what would mine look like compared to those. And I recommend, as accurate as my rankings are, I recommend that any fantasy player does that, because you have your gut feelings, you have your takes, and I'm not 100% right all of the time, right? So you could even use mine as a base and then go from there and add in your tweaks and move players around as you see fit, because that's the fun of it, right? You want the team to be built around what you believe. You don't just want to go and use somebody else's analysis. You want as many data points as you can get, different analysts, different stats, all that sort of stuff to bring it all together. So that's kind of what I was doing back then, and it's what I recommend that people do now too.
I couldn't agree more. That's kind of the process I've been on the last few years, is taking some really sharp guys who I've got to know, people like Joe Dolan and Pat Fitzmaurice, and Joe Pisapia, who would be great with their time. They're good friends of the show. They come on, and yourself over the last few years, and you're finally on. I look at the people who are the best at what they do to understand where I'm potentially going wrong, and projections is a learning curve. I think the first year I did them, I was miles off. Like, it wasn't even. I'm embarrassed to look at them now. They were so bad. But that's the whole process. I think you've got to start and be bad. No one does them year one and just go, right, I've nailed it.
I mean, it still happens. I think I had projected Cordero Patterson when he was on the Vikings that one year. Everybody thought he was going to break out. I think I had him projected for like 1,000-yard season or something that year, and he didn't come anywhere close to that.
and I think that's it. But it's all about processing. As long as you understand and you learn from it, then you get better. And we talk about this. I think we talked about it a couple of weeks ago, Stocks, that by doing projections, we're better fantasy players as a result. Even when our takes are wrong, the process was there. You can get why you went there. You get it wrong, you tweak it, and not to get fooled twice.
We try not to, yeah.
Yeah. Although if you're an AJ Green owner, then I mean, my love for AJ Green knows no bounds, and I have absolutely no idea anymore. But I keep doing it. But I mean, yeah,
the upside's still there.
You gotta let go.
No.
You just gotta please.
No.
Just this season, just don't draft any more AJ Green anywhere. I mean, if he's there in the 15th round, still don't take him. It's just that you need a healthy. It's like you're with you're with your first love. You've gone through the long distance. You've gone through the long distance relationship. You've realized it doesn't work, but you're doing it because you're just holding on to that first love. You just need to let go. It's healthier. The right person is out there for you, and it's not AJ Green.
And then am I supposed to be like the devil on the other shoulder? And I'm like, no, AJ Green's going to have 1,000 yards this year. Don't worry about it. Double-digit touchdowns.
He doesn't need any encouragement. There can be two. You could join my side. And he's still going to draft AJ Green in the 6th round somewhere.
No, 6 too early. The weird thing about AJ Green is he wasn't even my first love. I don't know why I'm so infatuated with the guy. It's somewhere in here, and I can't let go, man. It's eating me up.
This is why we're so polar opposites, because I just don't love anyone except Robert Woods. He's the only guy.
Yeah, so
I'm with you there.
You've started it. You never used to love anyone. You even said you'd trade your own mother, and now Robert Woods.
That's still true. I would still trade my mother to win a championship. It would happen.
But now you've got Robert Woods as your guy, and now from here, those tentacles of players are getting in. Trust me.
No, because if he starts going in the 2nd round, I'm not drafting him. It's not going to happen. It's just because he's still there.
Are you able to trade for your mother after the season? Can you get her back at some point? Like,
I'm sure I can come to some form of arrangement. I'm sure I've got some players on the roster somewhere I can trade back and someone to want.
Just out of interest, Justin, where do you have AJ Green projected this year?
I have him low 20, well, high 20s, depending how you look at it, but he's in my top 30. I still think, I mean, if you're drafting a Bengals receiver with Joe Mixon there, the upside is there. There's risk, but also where he's going, you're getting a discount. Like, you're not paying the price you used to have to pay of the 2nd round or the 3rd round for him. You can get him much, much later in drafts. And with the depth at receiver, I see him fall pretty far in a lot of the drafts I'm in. So I'm still willing to take him in a lot of places.
Excellent news. So moving on to your NFL team and why. Obviously, you're a Bills fan from the hat and the mug that appears every now and again. Why the Bills?
Well, I grew up in Niagara Falls, Canada, so right on the border, in the border town, and I was at a very impressionable age. I was around 9-10 years old when the Bills were going to the Super Bowl every year. So pretty easy for me to fall for the team at that point, not knowing that for the next 25 plus years, they weren't going to have very much success. We had the Doug Flutie years. Those were all right. And now, obviously, I love the coaching staff and the front office they have there now. It's fantastic seeing the culture change there and being able to look at them as a team that's making all the smart decisions, right? For years, I had to sit back and watch the Patriots just take advantage of values in the draft and constantly sign the right players and that sort of thing. And now you get to see the Bills. Like, one thing I point to is how they rebuilt the offensive line, right? They didn't have to go out and get a bunch of first round picks or overpay people in free agency. They get Mitch Morse, the center, a decent contract, but they got a lot of underrated players like Quentin Spain. They brought all these guys in to provide depth and then let them gel together. And it's working out. I mean, that offensive line kind of got rebuilt on the fly, and it really helped Josh Allen, I think, come on last year.
100%, and they're only going to be better another year on. Another year, another set of stats behind them. I think they're going to be great. I think you've got the best corner in the NFL in Tre'Davious White, especially going forward. I mean, I know Gilmore is Gilmore, but there's only so many years left. Whereas Tre'Davious White's got a long time, and I think he's a special talent.
Defense is strong. The addition of Stephon Diggs, that's another example, right? You look at your quarterback being a guy who maybe isn't the best deep ball thrower in the league. We can definitely say that. Maybe one of the worst. But you go out and get a receiver that excels in that area to help him, right? So they're just making really, really smart calls. And it's great to see a lot of it paying off and finally getting to cheer for a playoff team again after many years.
Absolutely. There's just no bad players on that roster. I mean, you wouldn't look at it and it's not full of the star-studded lineup of some teams in the NFL, and they're not trying to build an all-star team here. But you look at that roster and you look at their PFF grades accordingly. There isn't a bad player on that roster. There isn't anyone you say. You look at all the position groups. You could. I mean, I think the weakest group maybe might be tight end. I know Dawson Knox is pretty decent. I'd say that there isn't really. You can look at each section and go, defensive line strong, linebacker core's decent. Secondary's great, every department, and that we've never said that about the Bills. They've always had really, really weak areas. So Sean McDermott front office, everyone's done a great job. They're a really good example of how to build a team without, stumping up everything you've got and all your picks and everything to do it. And it's not necessarily a win now team. That team can be sustained for years.
Hope so.
Yeah. As long
I
as
don't have to throw this mug out the window, right?
Just don't hire John Gruden, you'll be fine.
Oh.
That's going to be the one thing. Just avoid John Gruden.
He's got 10 years. He has 10 years to figure it out, guys. Come on.
I watched him for 6 in Tampa. He couldn't have had a dreamier route to the Super Bowl and then to get his old team where he knew all the plays because Bill Callahan hadn't changed him. I mean, he doesn't get any better than that.
Cheers.
Yeah. How'd you want the ring? Do you want it just sent to you, or do we have to play the game? But yeah, no, I love the Bills. I love watching them. I love everyone talks about Allen's talent or the arm and everything, but that kid's got so much heart and spirit that I've said this so many times. That's what I love about Josh Allen. I know he's not the best quarterback. He's not. You wouldn't put him up against a Unitas or a Manning or a Brady and say, oh, this guy's incredible. But mental toughness and just passion, there ain't many guys that have got that desire and willingness to win more than him. And that's what I love about Josh Allen.
The team is really behind him as well. Like that sort of those characteristics really win the players over. So he's a pretty great leader on that team right now, it seems. And then with the team building around him, like we talked about, it's going to allow him to maximize his potential, right? And like you said, not an elite quarterback, but he's a guy who has some elite characteristics. And then when you surround him with the right players, you're going to people who compare him to Mitch Trubisky and Blake Bortles and that sort of thing. They're just so far off. Those were different organizations. It wasn't the same situation at all. So I don't think that Josh Allen's ever going to be a top 5 NFL quarterback, like you mentioned, but he could be a top 5 fantasy quarterback this year.
Yeah, I mean, he just missed it last year at 6, so no reason he can't do it this year.
No. Let's hope he does, because I just picked him up in my home dynasty league as my backup quarterback in case Lamar gets injured. So fingers crossed, Josh Allen is the man. So Justin, we ask our guests one final question in the introduction to break the ice, but the ice is well and truly broken. What advice would you give to our listeners who want to talk about their passion, whether it be football, ice hockey, the Buffalo Bills, for instance? What advice would you give to them to help them get on their way, talking or writing or whatever it is they want to do?
Yeah, well, it does kind of depend what they want to do, but when I joined the Score, I was running the NFL team. When I first joined the Score, I didn't join the Score just to do fantasy. I was running the NFL team of 6 to 10 writers, kind of varied at different points. So I get to do a lot of hiring, and I had a lot of people coming in who were kind of in that spot where they saw a job posting, they love football, they wanted to come in and cover it. And sometimes you'd get into that interview and they had no writing, they had no podcasts, they had no video, they had nothing to show other than the fact that, well, I love football. And it's like, I think one of the first things is it's not very hard. In the past, it felt like you needed to sign on with one of those big sites or something to be able to post stuff and get that kind of credibility. Now it's not like that at all. Now, in an afternoon, you could start a blog, start a podcast, and start a YouTube channel. It does not take that long at all. And you don't have to worry about it coming across the most professional. Make sure the content is solid, make sure you love what you're doing, and just keep producing. You're going to get better. I mean, I started the Score podcast 2 years ago now, 2.5 years ago. And even I thought when I started, man, I'm such a natural. This is fantastic. And I go back and look now and I'm like, man, I was terrible. I
Yeah.
was awful when we started. You just get better no matter where you're at. So by doing that, whether it's writing or podcasting or video, whatever, you're only going to get better. You need those reps. So even if no one's reading your blog, just keep doing it. Just to have that, to be able to show people or to get that experience, it's so important. And then the other thing I would say is, be ready to outwork everybody. Because for me, that's something, I don't know if it's cliche at this point, but it's something for me that, I don't sleep very much during the NFL season. I sleep probably 4 hours, 5 hours if I'm lucky a night. On Sunday mornings, I'm up at 4 a.m. after staying up until probably 1 the night before to make sure I got all the Schefter information, all the Ian Rappaport tweets that come out on the injuries. And my day it's a long day on Sundays. And I want every edge I could possibly get. A few years back, I would wake up at 9 a.m. Eastern, and I'd have a few hours before the games, and I'd update my rankings. And I started to feel like, stuff's coming out before that. I need to react sooner. And I thought, what are other people not doing? Well, they're probably not waking up at 4 o'clock in the morning. So I started to do that, and it's helped. It definitely has helped give me an edge. So finding those ways that you can outwork people and be willing to do that is also very important.
I couldn't agree with that more. It's marginal gains. It's so important to find an edge, outwork everyone. We get people all the time who ask us about how we get guests and how we, have the time to put out a book or put out writing or whatever we do. Stocks and I both have full pay jobs that aren't in this industry. We don't have the money to, or the situation to where we can give those up. So we have to put in 30, 40 hours a week on top of what we do on our day jobs, because this is what we love to do. And whether or not it's a career going forward, who knows? But my message to anybody that asks is we just work harder than most people. That's why we can get what we get out of it, because if people see that and people see that you love what you do, and they feed off that infection. So I couldn't that's probably one of the best answers we've had to that question, actually, because you can't beat hard work, you can't beat effort and hard work. You don't have to be a natural. I don't think Stocks and I are naturals at this. I don't think we're naturally designed to speak on microphones all day, but you learn and you get better and you take tips.
Yep. We're much better than, like you said, Justin. We're much better than when we started, and we see it even in our writing stuff. They come on and they provide articles, and there's a couple of guys who said that they didn't want to write because they didn't think they were very good at writing, and now all of a sudden they're giving us an article a week and they're absolutely brilliant. And
It's awesome.
yeah, they're just don't limit yourself, is what I should say. Always have a go, because you never know what you can do until you've actually tried. And if it's something you're passionate about, then you're going to go and do it. It gives you so much more impetus to go and do it if you're passionate about it. So give it a go. Let's talk some fantasy football. That's why we're here, right? How did your 2019 fantasy season go? Obviously, we heard about your tough loss in the SFP. But otherwise, how did it go?
2019 was great, and it wasn't just because I won the Fantasy Pros accuracy contest, which obviously that one was very, very big to finally get that under my belt. But it was just such a difference from the year before. The year before, 2018, my wife and I moved during the off season into our first home. So we were selling our condo and moving into the house. My dad was in the hospital for a stretch. He's fine now, but he spent a few months in the hospital. So I didn't feel like I had an off season. The week one came around and I was exhausted in the first few weeks of the season. And normally you don't get to that point until maybe the second half of the year. And to start that year, I had 3 of probably my worst weeks ever in that Fantasy Pros contest because I just wasn't able to spend as much time on it. And I had to make a decision at that point after the first few weeks. Am I going to maybe not have a great year, or am I going to try to dig deeper and figure a way, out of this hole? And I was able to do that. And I was able to do it by, not spending a lot of time with my family and friends. My wife would joke, that was the first year that I was able to work from home. I started working from home in late August of 2018. And I think she thought when I started working from home, I would be around and available all the time. And because of that, I was probably less available than when I was working in the office. When my office door closed in the house, I was gone for hours, maybe the whole day. But it worked. I was able to kind of refine my process. I tried to cut out some things that maybe weren't as predictive and that I kind of just been using, over the years and didn't really look at enough. And I dug myself out of the hole and I ended up finishing 4th overall in 2018, despite all of that. And then last year was the first year where I had the full off season where I was just full-time fantasy. Because like you guys are saying, even though I was in the industry, I was just working the NFL team, and the fantasy stuff was kind of a side thing that I was doing at the Score for the first few years. And it wasn't until 2018 that they took me off the NFL and made me full-time fantasy. So last year was the first time I had the full off season just to focus on fantasy, to refine my projections, all that sort of stuff. And it worked out, obviously, but also it allowed me to enter the season more prepared than ever and more rested than ever because I didn't have to do a move or anything like that, driving to the hospital back and forth all the time. So I started the year and I felt like I was right back in the zone that I kind of finished 2018 on, and I never looked back. It was a great season. In addition to winning the accuracy contest, I won the Fantasy Pros Dynasty Invitational, and there's some heavy hitters in that one: Mike Tagliere and Sean Kerner and Elliot Chris, like I mentioned, Pat Fitzmaurice, a bunch of guys in that one. I was able to take home the title in that as well. So yeah, all around, just a fantastic season, and a one that I hope I can replicate.
Yeah, couldn't agree more.
Yeah, could be a tough one, tough act to follow.
Yeah. Set the bar pretty high right there.
Well, I was even joking that, now that I'm working from home and I have the whole off season to focus on fantasy, that was the first time and I won the contest. So now I should win the contest every year, right?
Yeah, you're locked in. You're just going to scratch your name on that trophy. You're not going to get it back. In fact, I can see the trophy in the background, if I'm not mistaken.
It is. It's this one right here. This is the one that's so big it doesn't fit in the frame. Yeah, they went all out.
Casual drop. That's awesome.
Yeah.
So,
Man.
is there any insights from last year in terms of learnings when you've gone back and reviewed the 2019 season that you're going to take forward with you in 2020?
I think one of them is that don't look at the season as one whole entity. Look at it as break it up, whether it's breaking it up in the first half of the year, the second half of the year, or even I like to look at it in like 3 or 4 game stretches. So when you go into your draft, don't think about, I think the people that look ahead and, to the fantasy playoff schedule and stuff, you can do that, but I don't know how predictive it's going to be. It's very difficult to figure out, what defenses are going to look like late in the season. And we'll probably talk about the COVID stuff at some point here, but when you look at, what things could be like later in the season without the COVID stuff, just injuries that could hit, players breaking out, defenses could look a lot different. So trying to predict what they're going to be like in the last month of the season could be very difficult. I like to focus on that first month. And if you get out to a 3-1, a 4-0 start, you're just in such a better position where you can now kind of control your league. When you're making trades, you can make trades where now you're looking ahead, and you're looking ahead with more information than you had before the season started. Whereas if you have a losing record, now you just got to get some wins under your belt, or all of a sudden you're going to be out of it by, week 6 or week 7, and you won't even have a chance at the fantasy playoffs. So you want to be operating from a position of strength. And along those lines, I would say, if you see something early in the season that you feel strongly about, don't be afraid to pull the trigger on a trade or releasing a player or anything like that. I think sometimes people hold on to their preseason beliefs a little too much. And I was guilty of that last year, where I talked myself. I had a solid team in the one league. I'd started strong, and I needed a quarterback, though. And I was happy just kind of playing the waiver wire. But Lamar Jackson, his owner, had kept Patrick Mahomes the year before. So he was looking to move Lamar Jackson after a few games. And I looked at it and I talked myself out of it. I don't want to pay for a quarterback. Lamar Jackson went up against easy defenses the first few weeks. Maybe he's not as good as it looks. But in the back of my mind, I had talked all preseason about how good Lamar Jackson was. He was the late round guy to go after. And I didn't make the trade. And when I look back now, I lost in the semifinals, and Lamar Jackson would have been the difference for me. So if you know early in the season and you feel strongly about something, pull the trigger on that. Absolutely. Don't be comfortable in your preseason beliefs. Don't be comfortable with your team. Make sure you're constantly making moves and gaining edges and trades and all that sort of stuff as the year goes along.
Yeah, agreed. We host a 256 team best ball knockout tournament. So every 2 weeks is a knockout. So if you lose your matchup in the first 2 weeks, you're out. That's you done for the tournament. And that's a really good way of looking at it, because there's no point in planning for the playoffs if you get knocked out in the first round or the second round.
That's exactly what I did last year. I thought I'd build a team to think about, I'll get through the first couple of rounds, it'll be fine. And then I built all these studs, and true enough, if I got into the quarterfinals, I would have won the thing, because my team was good. It just didn't stack up week 1. I went against someone who had Sammy Watkins, and that was the end of me. And that's what happens if you try and count your chickens. You can do a bit of planning for the end of the future, but you need to, as you say, you got to stack up wins. You got to keep going. Don't look too far ahead.
And some of the best teams might be the teams that look completely different from what they drafted, right? If you feel strongly about, your trading abilities, you keep gaining those edges in trades. It's like stocks. Everybody always compares fantasy to stocks, right? We'll sell a player after those first few weeks when they had an easy schedule, and the schedule is going to get a lot tougher. This year, it might be the Bills, because they have a very tough schedule. After their bye, it's like Chargers, Steelers, 49ers. It's like every tough defense you can imagine, Patriots. So that might be a situation where some of the Bills that start strong, you might want to look at trading them partway through the year there and kind of maxing out the value and finding somebody else later in the year. But I just think any edge you can get along the way, and trades and waiver wire moves and stuff like that, is another one of those ways. Don't just look at the draft like that's the be all and end all.
Love that. Yeah.
So let's talk projecting NFL offenses.
Okay.
Obviously, being the number one in the entire globe, there's a secret sauce to your process, and you can't give the secret sauce away. But how do you go about your process when it comes to rankings to begin with? Like, do you have a base point you start from, or how do you get started on your rankings?
It depends. Well, it depends what you're talking about. If you're talking about like the draft rankings or in-season rankings. For the draft rankings, I start off just with rankings in January, and part of that is because I don't really feel like doing projections in January. At that point, we've gone through 16, 17 weeks of the season, still doing a little bit of DFS in the playoffs. But in January, I want to be able to kick back a bit and not have to just grind again. So I kind of go easy on myself there, and I just look at the projections, what I think could happen the next season. Also, there's so much player movement that's about to happen that if you're spending all that time on projections, a lot of it isn't going to matter in a month or two. I don't do my first projections until free agency happens. And then at that point, you got a much better idea of what rosters are going to look like. You also kind of have an idea maybe of what teams are going to do in the draft, because you can look at some of the holes and realize certain teams that are going to go after certain positions. But at that point, you have a better idea. The coaching changes, the free agency moves, and maybe some of the trades that have happened and stuff. And at that point, then it's just a matter of every single time you're working on those projections, digging deeper on something else, whether it's strength of schedule, whether it's, players who are dealing with serious injuries and having to figure out where they're at, where they're going to be at come next season. All those little things start to add up, right? The historical data, the vacated targets and touches and all that sort of stuff. You're just every time refining them until really like this point in the year is probably the first time that I feel great about my projections. You never feel perfect about them, but at this point in the year, I've gone through, offensive lines and defensive roster changes and matchups and all that sort of stuff. And now you start to go, okay, I got enough data points in there where I feel pretty good about where I have those players. And then during the preseason, we're not going to get one this year, but normally in the preseason, I'm doing a takeaways article every night after the preseason games. And people underrate the preseason. I know you don't learn that much about starters, but you learn a lot about depth players. And when those injuries happen during the season and you know what, they were playing this guy a lot. He looked really good in the preseason. I think I'm going to grab that running back. It gives you some more insight. Now we're not going to have that this year, so that's kind of unfortunate. And we're going to have to make a lot of decisions early in the year. It's going to be kind of like the preseason, maybe in the first few weeks. But come the season, then I'm publishing those, and then you're on to in-season rankings. The in-season rankings, I go the opposite way because you're kind of dialed in now in season. But it starts for me with the math at that point. I'm breaking down some kind of loose projections. It's not as refined as they would be for the preseason or for the draft rankings. But I'm doing the math first, and then I'm bringing sort of my flavor to it, my takes, my gut, the things that I see that maybe the rankings, the model's going to give me something, or it's like I don't think Gardner Minshew's going to be a top 5 guy, but all of a sudden, hey, maybe he could be a top 15 guy, and he's going outside the top 20. Then you start to maybe bump him back a few spots. You don't want to get too crazy. And there's some people out there that go full hot take, and sometimes they are right. Last year I thought Lamar Jackson was going to be good. I didn't think he was going to be as good as he was. The year before, I even said, Patrick Mahomes could be a top 5 quarterback. I didn't think he was going to have a historic season and be the number 1 quarterback overall. But sometimes those things do hit. But yeah, it's kind of the opposite, weirdly, that in season, I'm kind of doing the math first and then adding my takes because the injury stuff as it comes out during the week, that's a lot of what you're going to refine the rankings with. Whereas in the off season, I'm kind of going easy on myself and starting with just the rankings and then bringing the projections then to kind of make it a little clear.
So just on that, going back to the draft rankings and building up for the season, how much does doing drafts, best balls in particular, and looking at ADP shifts and data sway your rankings? Is there any sway in it, or is it like, no, I'm committed to my process, I know it works, you're not overly fussed or bothered about the ADPs that you're getting in best balls in May, June, early July,
I
for
mean,
example?
I'm looking at all that ADP information, so it's in the back of my mind somewhere because I'm looking at it for the drafts I'm doing and for the advice that I'm giving, right? If you're talking about breakouts and busts and sleepers, that all is because of the ADP, right?
Yeah.
But to be honest, when it comes to the rankings and the projections, I'm not really taking that stuff into account at all. And one thing I always tell people is that's why you can't just draft off of rankings. You want to use the rankings as a big data point for sure. But if I have Anthony Miller, let's say, of the Bears, if I have him ranked as an 8th round pick, you definitely don't need to take him in the 8th round. You can get him much later in drafts, but that's just to give you an idea of how valuable he is. So depending, you have to make a decision in your league. How sharp is everybody in your league? Are you playing with just kind of casual fans? Are people going to know about Anthony Miller? When do you have to pull the trigger on him? You might want to jump a round or two ahead of his ADP to make sure you get him if you feel really strongly. But it's not just drafting off the ADP, because if you're just going off the ADP, you're probably going to make some picks and lose a lot of value in the draft, where you could pick that up by kind of looking at both and comparing them and making maybe your own rankings of where you want to take guys.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's fundamental to anything, because the worst thing you can do is have a guy who you rate in the top 6 and take him as a top 6 player when you can get him, at pick 58, pick 60, and then pick up the other guys and have an even stronger squad. I think with ADP, I mean, like we looked at it last year. You have players like Chris Godwin who went and jumped 3 rounds and things like that. Clearly people were getting wise to not just the hype, but you could see the high stakes players, FFPC players. If you look at some of their ADPs, you could see huge shifts. You're thinking, okay, these guys are dialed in, they're sharp players. you start seeing Chris Godwin go from a 6th-round player to a high 3rd player, you're starting to think, okay, well, there's got to be something in that. And in some, sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. I was just curious if some of that maybe played into your thinking, but then I guess you're probably already ahead of the curve on that in a lot of ways.
But also to tie into that, when I'm doing those early breakouts, like I put out like a super early breakouts column in like February or something. But when I start to do sort of the main breakouts and bust columns right after the draft, the NFL draft, I use the data, the ADP from the best ball leagues, from the FFBC and stuff, because those are much, much more accurate and maybe indicative of what you're going to see come August. If you're just going off the regular sites, sort of the big box kind of sites, the ADPs there's not a lot of people drafting in those. And I think a lot of them are dependent on human drafters to help, curb the ADPs. They're not really indicative until maybe August when a lot of people dive in there. So you want to look at those best ball leagues where there's money on the line. People are going to be a little more dialed in with that stuff earlier in the off season, even going back to when they open in like March and April and stuff, even before the draft. So always be looking at those ADPs versus just I won't mention any sites, but some of the the sites that rely on the more casual fans coming in.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we play on a couple, and one of them only updated their bye weeks about 3 weeks ago. You sit there like, oh, okay, be drafting it's wrong bye weeks, etc. You mentioned COVID, and it's a bit point to talk about it now because obviously there's a lot of things going on about this. But is there, in terms of COVID-19, I mean, are you going to? Is some of potentially the effect of COVID, preseason, etc., baked into your rankings, especially as we're not going to have a preseason at all, or are you just going to project this as what's going to happen, and then if injuries happen, you'll just move and adjust accordingly?
Because all players are going to be at the same risk, basically. Like I haven't changed it that much. I think there's a strong chance that we're going to see a lot of players miss time and that overall the projection should be lower. And you should be taking into account that players might only play 13 instead of 16 games or something like that. But I don't think we can really change too much right now. The one area where I have kind of factored it in is with rookies. And you could say with free agents who change teams as well, but at least those guys are veterans. We see them maybe not do as well in a lot of positions with their new teams or have a little bit of a learning curve with that new team, but at least they're veterans. They've been through this before. The rookies, we can't underestimate how big of a deal it is. It's a new job. Think about any of us when you start a new job, right? There's that period where you're kind of getting acclimated and figuring out how things work, getting to know everybody there, your bosses, your new coworkers, how things operate in that new business. They have to go through all of that now just in the preseason. They didn't get rookie camps. They didn't get OTAs. And now they're just thrown into it. I'm sure they got a little bit from the virtual stuff that they did, but it's not the same. It's not the same as being on the field. And you saw even in some situations, for the Bills, for example, when they all got together, I'm not sure how many of their rookies actually were there. And it's probably because they don't really have close relationships yet with a lot of those guys, right? So I don't think, for example, like Zach Moss wasn't with the team yet in those, player only practices, whereas Devin Singletary was. So how much do you factor that in? I think it is going to have somewhat of a factor. Running back, not as much, because running back, we see in general, those guys can hit the ground running pretty easily, no pun intended. But with wide receivers, with quarterbacks, Joe Burrow is somebody who I would like to rank even higher, but he's going to take the field for the first time in an NFL game in week 1. He didn't get that preseason to kind of work out some of the kinks. He could still be fantastic, but the odds of him coming out of the gate strong are a little bit lower. So rookies, I've shied away from a little bit in drafts, and I think they're ranked a little bit lower versus probably some of the other analysts in the industry just for that very reason.
Smart.
Very. So I've got Juju on the mind, and we're going to talk about higher and lower than consensus, and also you talking about ADP for people who've got money on the line. Well, in the draft I did if you have your own rankings in front of you and you on an actual bit of paper and you can cross them off as people get drafted, you can see where the value is still on your draft board or your sheet. And if you're going by the ADP list on the app you're using, which is why I bring Juju up, because he was the 104th player ranked on this ADP guide.
Wow.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah, it was 104th.
Where are you drafting?
This was on Sleeper last week. I jest you not. So it was 104th. It was Superflex, but even so, I was at 104th. How many rounds do I let him slide? And I was at the back end of the 7th, and I was like, I have to pull the trigger on Juju now because
Oh, what?
yeah,
That's
I know.
wild value.
And it was because people obviously hadn't scrolled far enough down the list to find him, and because they didn't have the list of players ticked off, they'd forgotten he existed because he wasn't in front of them. So I was just thinking, can I let him fall? Can I let him fall? And it got to the 7th, and I took him at 7-8, and then someone who was drafting after him was like, "Oh, I wish you let Juju fall a little bit further. Like I was hoping he'd fall." And I was like, "Yeah, of course you were. You didn't even know he existed until I just drafted him." But yeah, so like you say, ADP from people who put money on the line is far more accurate at the moment than some of the other places that we're drafting. And that brings me to high and lower, because I am super high on Juju this year, like almost probably, as Murph would say, crazy high. But we won't get into that today. We've talked about it already. Do you have anyone player-wise that you're higher on the consensus, and maybe a couple of positions, and as to why you are on them? And then is there anyone you're absolutely down on against consensus this year at the moment?
Wow, there's a lot. I think I don't normally look at like where like the ECR, like the expert consensus rankings, but because you mentioned that we were going to do this, I took a quick look here. I have Cam Newton at QB 14. The expert consensus rankings on Fantasy Pros is QB 18. I was a little higher on this Patriots offense, even with Jared Stidham under center, because at that point, I mean, I wasn't taking Stidham anywhere near QB 14, but he was a guy that could run the ball a little bit. And also, we're talking about Bill Belichick and Josh McDaniels. I have a lot of faith, and maybe it's the Bills fan in me, but I have a lot of faith that those guys are going to figure out how to generate some offense. They've done it basically every time Brady's gone down, whether it was Matt Castle stepping in several years ago, whether it was during Brady's suspension when they had Garoppolo and Brissett and they were kind of just piecing it together at quarterback. They've been able to win games. They've been able to produce offense. And the weapons there aren't that bad. Like Julian Edelman is a 90 catch guy still, could be a 100 catch guy. N'Keal Harry, we were all so high on last year. He gets hurt. He comes in. There should be no shock that he doesn't create separation. People that are pointing to that, we knew that coming out. He's more of a contested catch guy. And now he's got a quarterback who's had experience with guys like that and is willing to throw the ball up to him and maybe not be as hard on him for being a rookie that doesn't know the offense yet because he missed the first half of the season on injury reserve and that sort of stuff. The running backs there, Sony Michel being extremely underrated, has over 1,800 rushing yards in his first 2 seasons here, and yet everyone wants to just pass him by. Hopefully he'll be healthy to start the season, but James White, another good option. Mo Sanu was hurt after he came over to the Patriots down the stretch. So there's some very professional players in that offense, and now they don't need to lift up this young quarterback. You got a guy who was a former MVP joining the team there. You look at Tom Brady, he had 5 rushing touchdowns over the last 2 years. You don't think Cam Newton can do that and add to his numbers on top of some rushing yards that Brady couldn't produce? So I'm very, very willing to take Cam Newton just outside of that QB1 range. And if we see him in practice looking really good, I would probably move him into that low end QB1 range over some guys like Aaron Rodgers and Drew Brees and Matt Stafford. I think he'll jump those guys if we see him on a practice field looking healthy. So he's definitely one. Let's look at the other positions. Kenyon Drake. Kenyon Drake to me is a first round pick this year. Now, last year, he only played 8 games with them. If you double those numbers, you put on pace what he did in those 8 games over a full 16-game schedule, he would have finished as the running back 2 behind only Christian McCaffrey. I'm not saying that's going to happen, but I think he has a lot more upside than people are giving him credit for. I have him at RB6 right now. I'm not sure where the consensus was on that one, but RB6, I'd be willing to take him in the first round. And I've gotten a hard time. I got a hard time a few months ago for taking him in the late second round in one draft.
Crazy.
And now I'm happy to take him in the late first, and I'm still getting a hard time, but I don't think it's going to be a problem come the season. I think I'm going to cash in there. At wide receiver, Allen Robinson, DJ Moore. I mean, just look at what these guys have done recently. Allen Robinson, playing with a completely erratic Mitch Trubisky last year. I think he had 98 catches. He had over 1,100 yards, 7 touchdowns. Maybe you get something a little better from Trubisky this year, or maybe you get Nick Foles coming in and helping to stabilize, give some average quarterback play. I have Allen Robinson all the way up at wide receiver 5. Now, part of that is because after you get through those first 4, it's very close for, and you kind of mentioned it with Juju, when you're going from like wide receiver 5 to wide receiver 17, 18, it's not that much of a difference in the projections. You could really bump guys up and down quite a bit in that range. But I think Allen Robinson is somebody with a lot of upside, maybe even 100 catch upside in that offense as well. DJ Moore, what he's done as a young player with bad quarterback play last season to do what he did with Kyle Allen as his quarterback. And now you're not getting an elite quarterback coming in, but you're getting Teddy Bridgewater, who's just a much better version of Kyle Allen. He's still going to want to throw short and rely on his receivers to rack up yards after the catch. So I have DJ Moore inside my top 10. I have him at wide receiver 8. And he's a guy, in my mind, maybe the biggest breakout this season. We could be talking about him next year as a top 4, top 5 receiver, I think. The sky's the limit for him in that offense with that new coaching staff. It's going to be a really good attack, I think. And they're going to be forced to throw the ball because their defense is terrible. They are completely rebuilding the defense now, and it's going to take a while for all those rookies to catch up, especially with this offseason like we talked about. So DJ Moore is going to be up there in volume. And the one thing about him that people don't like is the touchdowns, but touchdowns can be a very wild stat from year to year, right? And generally, yardage tends to be predictive of touchdowns. So we haven't seen it for him yet, but if he continues at this pace, and I think he will, we're going to see those touchdowns come around. Tight end, who did I write down here? Eric Ebron. We're one season removed from Eric Ebron putting up 14 total touchdowns with good quarterback play. Then he has a year where the quarterback play disappears. It's Jacoby Brissett. No offense to Jacoby Brissett, but he's not Andrew Luck. And now you have Ebron going to a team where we think there's going to be much better quarterback play. You think Ben Roethlisberger looks like he's going to come back healthy. That offense has a lot of potential. And even if the yardage isn't there, right? They got Juju. I really like Deontay Johnson. We don't know. He's not really proven yet, though. But even if the yardage isn't there for Ebron, the touchdowns, they could still be. They need a weapon around the red zone. So I think there's a shot we see Ebron have a year, kind of like we saw Jared Cook have last season, where the yardage isn't huge, but the touchdown numbers are there. And with tight end, you put up a big touchdown total, and you could definitely be, a top 10 tight end pretty easily, maybe even higher than that. So I really like Ebron, and he's going off the board. I'd take him just outside of my top 12. He's going off the board outside the top 20. He's really undrafted in most places. So those are some guys that I really like. I mean, there's so many more. If you want me to go into the guys I don't like, Baker Mayfield. Yes. I know we were excited about him last year. We were excited. And I think efficiency-wise, I think he's going to be much better this season. The problem is that new coaching staff, that new system that's coming in. Kevin Stefanski is going to bring what they were doing in Minnesota. The volume is not going to be there for Baker. He's got all those weapons around him, but they're going to run the ball primarily. So while the efficiency is going to go up, while the interceptions are probably going to come down, kind of like we see with Kirk Cousins, right? He's a guy who doesn't put up a lot of interceptions. You're not going to see the big games consistently from Mayfield. It's going to be just like Kirk Cousins. You're going to see a big game once in a while when they have to throw, but normally he is not going to have big volume, at least not big enough to be a real fantasy asset, in my opinion, at a position that's so deep that I'm going to rather go with guys like Gardner Minshew and Teddy Bridgewater. 100%. There's so many quarterbacks out there you could take. I have Baker Mayfield outside of my top 20, and I think that's much different than a lot of people. James Conner, and this isn't a talent thing, but I'm staying away from him. I know there's a lot of people who want to invest in him because of the price. You're getting a guy who could potentially put up top 5, top 10 numbers, but I look at him as a player that I don't think he's going to be able to stay healthy for a full season. And if he does stay healthy, I think it's going to be at a reduced workload. I think it's going to require them to get other running backs in the mix, and that's going to take away that ceiling for him a little bit. We had Dr. Edwin Porras from Fantasy Points on our podcast a little while ago, and he kind of reiterated the same thing, that he was concerned now that unless they lower the volume, that And maybe that is a strategy you could take. If you want to get Connor and just say, you know what, maybe I get him for half a season and then I'll figure it out after that when he does get hurt. You can totally do that. There's guys like Will Fuller or Brandon Cooks that I would probably approach the same way there. Just don't think that you're going to get a guy who's going to give you that top 5 stats for the whole season, because I don't think Connor's capable of doing it. At wide receiver, I don't want to harp on the Browns, but Odell Beckham Jr. Injuries were a big part of it last year. And if they were going to run the same offense as last year and he was going to be healthy and you were coming into the season with Jarvis Landry a little banged up, like it seems like he's going to be, maybe I'd be a little more excited about Beckham. But in this offense, we saw it with Adam Thielen and Stephon Diggs. They would have big games, but they really had to survive on being incredibly efficient in order to be consistent. And Thielen at one point was doing that early last year before he got hurt. He was scoring touchdowns despite the fact he was getting 6-7 targets a game. He'd score a touchdown and keep his fantasy value intact. But over the course of a whole season, it's going to be tough for Beckham to get back into the wide receiver 1 rank. So I look at it more as a low-end wide receiver 2. If we see Landry come back healthy, if they rely on the tight ends a little more, which I think they're going to, Austin Hooper and David Njoku if he doesn't get traded. You have Kareem Hunt now. They're catching passes out of the backfield. It's going to be really hard for Beckham to put up the volume there. And I know I've been talking forever. We got one more. We'll do tight end that I don't like. Noah Fant. And this is another one where volume is going to be the issue. I love the talent, but look what they've done. They've gone on and added all these pieces in the passing game. Cortland Sutton, Jerry Jeudy, KJ Hamler, Albert Boone, who was teammates in college with Drew Lock. So there's a bit of a connection there. We could see him siphon some touchdowns away. I think it's a team that wants to run the ball as well. And you have Melvin Gordon and Phillip Lindsay. I see this as a situation where it is going to be tough to predict who outside of maybe Cortland Sutton is going to catch a lot of passes in that offense. So I'd be staying away from Noah Fant at this point. Where you maybe saw him as potentially a tight end 1 this year, I have him way down where other people have Eric Ebron kind of around that tight end 20 range.
That's a strong,
spicy takes. But like you said, there's logic to all of it. So definitely buying a lot of that. Just to sort of wrap this up, you've obviously published the draft kit for the Score, which is an amazing resource. I've dipped into it quite a bit and continue to look through it most days because I'm drafting most days. In fact, I've drafted every day since April. So it's a really powerful guide because it's not just a rankings list that everyone puts together. You've got a lot of unique features in there and your own take. So just talk a little bit about sort of what the guide is trying to do for players and some of the things in there that are going to help make players be more successful and give them some more edges that you're not going to get from a standard, here's a list of 200 guys that you should rank from 1 to 200.
Well, the first thing is that everything we're doing at the Score, we have a website as well, score.com, but everything we're doing is designed for the mobile app. So you're going to want to download the app because it's set up to be very easy to jump between articles, to jump between rankings while you're doing your draft, right? I want you to have your phone right there and be able to grab, should I take that player? What's his strength of schedule look like? All that sort of stuff is baked in. What does his offensive line look like? All that stuff. So that's the first thing is we want to make it as easy as possible to kind of navigate through. And then on top of that, you're getting rankings and tiers and auction values and all that stuff. We haven't even added a lot of the things yet that are coming, right? The projections are going to be coming soon. The offensive line rankings are going to be coming as well in the next week or so. All that stuff, it's updated constantly leading up to the season. I know, the thing used to be to buy a magazine in May and you're set up for the rest of the time. But really now you want to be at the cutting edge, right? Whenever anything happens, it takes 2 seconds for me to jump in and now update my rankings. And now you can see what those look like. And during the preseason, especially, I know we're not going to get games, but I'm constantly updating. And it'll be the same this year because we're going to get word out of these camps, what players look like, all that sort of stuff, injuries that happen. So you want those, updates as fast as you can possibly get them. And it'll all be in there, right? So I think, I think it's an incredible resource that we're giving away for free. I think it's awesome that the Score is willing to do that. There's a ton of great draft kits out there, but to have this one, readily available and kind of designed to be as easy to use as possible with all this different information in there, to get that for free, yeah, it's at least worth checking out, I will say. If you don't like it at that point, fine, but it would be foolish not to give it a chance.
Especially as you're the world's greatest ranker as well. So, to get your rankings on your phone on a mobile device, we're going to put the link in the show notes so everybody can get access to it. We've got a visual of it on the overlay that people are watching this on the stream. So down
Awesome.
bottom left. So do check it out, and it is a great resource. Even if you've got your tiers, have a look and compare. But the strength of schedule, as you mentioned, things like the offensive line, there, those little sharp edges to those marginal gains we're talking about that will just sharpen your focus, will sharpen your tiers, and as you say, it's there to be used during your draft. It's a wonderful resource, and it was a big reason why I wanted you on, because it is such a
And
great
actually,
tool.
one other thing I'll add there too with the mock drafts. So in the past, and maybe I'll do it again in the coming weeks, but in the past, we've done mock drafts with other analysts in the industry, right? And that's great. Like it's fantastic to see where everyone's, taking players and what they're thinking. But I would caution that a lot of the analyst mock drafts don't reflect what happens in actual leagues, right? So what I've done the last couple of years is I've found the people at the Score. It's not just the people on our NFL team, but some of them are. But it's the people across the Score. It's not just people in our newsroom either. We got people from the sales team, the marketing team, people who play fantasy. I got them involved. I want to see what they think in these drafts. And I think it gives you a better picture of what might happen in more casual leagues. In analyst leagues, for example, quarterbacks go so late because everybody knows, right? I'll wait on quarterback. But in these leagues, you see them go where, they probably will go in your draft. So you'll be less surprised, I would say, if you're looking at those kind of mock drafts. And I'm breaking down after every round in those, what we're seeing and what picks were good and what weren't. And some of the staff, I think, I'm surprised some of them still do the drafts with me because I've given them a hard time for a few of their picks. But I think that's also another kind of unique resource that you might not be getting other places where everybody's kind of doing these analyst drafts. And like I said, they're great. And I'm probably going to do one in the next couple of weeks that I post in there too. But it's something else that you can get in there that can give you maybe a little more of an idea what your draft's going to look like.
And also, and the app is great, as you mentioned. Not just it's easy to read, but the notifications, you can set it to your preferences of teams. Your soccer team do a good job. They get notifications out before a lot of the big outlets here as well. So you can tell them from me in the UK, they do a great job. But the notifications are spot on. They're really
I'm
great.
so glad to hear that. Our soccer team, they work so hard. Those guys are fantastic, and I don't know if they always get enough notoriety being in North America. But yeah, they do a fantastic job. And I will say too, with the Score app, on top of all the fantasy and even all the NFL coverage that we have, I used the Score app before I even worked at the Score. It is just so easy to use. It's so intuitive. Jumping around in the app, and it only continues to get better. So I would have done that infomercial for them even before I worked there. And now I'm just glad that I do work there, and I can help it be even better.
No, like I said, it's a great app. You can tell the soccer team that
I
use
definitely
them
will.
because it is a great resource, and the the news that comes out, it comes out before most mainstream apps. When you get the notification, it's there, and it's like great. I can go in and read something else, and you can set your preferences to your teams. You just get notifications on things that interest you when there's breaking news, and it's rapid. And I'm not just saying that because Justin's on. It is quick most of the time.
Well,
I
and with
noticed
those notifications, you can break it down very specific, right? So whether it's fantasy, whether it's NFL, soccer, whatever, you can break it down. I only want breaking news alerts. I only want alerts from this team. What type of alerts do you want for that team? Do you want player news? Do you want, features that we've written? Do you want, videos, all that sort of stuff? You can pick and choose what you want from each thing. So that's fantastic too, right? So your phone isn't blowing up all the time with stuff you don't want. You can really select exactly what you want to be getting.
I get like 4 a day. It's perfect.
There you go.
So, Justin, we always finish with one spicy hot take for fantasy football in the upcoming year, or if it's in season for that year coming. But my Denver heart bleeds already at your Noah Fant one. But excuse me, do you have an even spicier one that you're prepared to air here?
Well, you guys tell me. I just did a bold predictions article in the last couple weeks, and I've talked about that. I touched on Gardner Minshew a couple times. One of them was that Gardner Minshew will be a top 10 quarterback, mostly because his rushing numbers there. But let's say, okay, is this spicy enough? Le'Veon Bell and David Johnson are both going to get back into the RB1 ranks this year. Everyone's writing them off.
Spicy.
Everyone's writing them off. They're 28 years old. They're so old for running backs. You know, people look at that clip of David Johnson last year running like he's Jason Witten on the field, and everyone overreacts to one clip. The guy was hurt in the first 6 weeks of the season. David Johnson was a top 5 fantasy running back. Then he gets hurt. Chase Edmonds comes in. He produces. They go trade for Kenyon Drake. David Johnson sees that and says, I need my job. I'm going to lose my starting job. He rushes back. He wasn't healthy. He looks terrible in the second half of the season. But everybody, for some reason, forgets that in the first 6 weeks, he was producing. So I think people are just overlooking him completely. Houston has all the motivation in the world to give him as many touches as he could possibly want after trading him for DeAndre Hopkins. So Bill O'Brien, whatever you think of him, he wants DJ to do well there. And we saw Carlos Hyde step in last year, and I wrote him off. I didn't think Carlos Hyde was going to go in there and put up 1,000 yards in that offense, but the volume was there. So you have Johnson coming in, able to do that, but also he's going to catch a bunch of passes, which Carlos Hyde was not going to do last season. So I would be almost surprised at this point if we don't see a big rebound year from David Johnson. And then Le'Veon Bell, he was knocking a lot of rust off. He sat out. He signs with the Jets. He shows up there last year. That Jets team was cursed from the get-go, whether it's Sam Darnold getting mono and missing time early in the season, a terrible offensive line. Adam Gase is not a great coach. We know at this point. And I wonder whether Le'Veon Bell is going to get traded at some point this season because it really seems like Adam Gase doesn't like him. They brought in Frank Gore. They take P. Ryan as a guy who could step in maybe and maybe be the running back of the future there. So that's another one. I wouldn't be shocked if Le'Veon Bell ends up on another team halfway through the year. But if he stays with the Jets, or even if he gets traded, it'll probably be a good situation that needs a running back. But the offensive line is better. They've invested in the offensive line, first-round pick. Kai Becton, you put him at tackle. Hopefully Sam Darnold stays healthy this year. I think that would help the offense. You know, they're not going to start from behind the 8 ball with him missing time in the first month. And Le'Veon Bell wasn't that bad last year. It's another guy that people look at because that offense was terrible. But he was a top 20 running back last year. He's going to get the receiving work. I'm not that scared of Frank Gore. As a Bills fan, Frank Gore, I love him. He's fantastic. It's wild that he's still doing what he's doing. But he's not a starting running back anymore. This is a guy who's just a complimentary piece who gets brought in to help train the younger running backs, to help bring that work ethic in. He is not somebody that's going to come in and take significant touches away from Le'Veon Bell. And really, he might help Le'Veon Bell because Bell was getting just ground last year. He was just getting crushed because he had to do everything. He was getting all the touches. He might be more effective if you take a little bit of that workload off of him and he's a little fresher later in the season. So I like both those guys to rebound this year. And I don't think a lot of people do. I think people are just writing them off and they're getting excited about the rookies coming in and such a good rookie class. But those are two guys who are slated to get a lot of volume and in my mind still have a lot of talent.
Yeah, I agree. One thing I would say on David Johnson is don't accidentally draft Duke Johnson because they are both D Johnson for Houston on your draft board. So get the right one. But yeah, I'm pretty high on David Johnson as well. Maybe not as high as you as Le'Veon Bell. So that was pretty spicy. I think that'll do, Murph. What do you reckon?
All right, sweet.
Absolutely. That one was fire. I'm with you on Lev Bell. I'm not quite there on Johnson, but I'm more than willing to be proved wrong.
Well, I mean, if you agreed with me, it wouldn't be a bold take at that point, right? You got to have at least somebody disagree with some part of it.
Absolutely. But I was with you on Bell all the way. I wrote a piece about he was a top 5 ADP buy. Just based on his ADPs, he's arguably 2 rounds too low, or at least he was when I wrote the article. He's gone up a little bit since.
Yeah, for sure.
So Justin, man, we appreciate you coming on big time, and obviously you're a busy guy, maybe not quite as busy as you might have been because of the COVID sitch and no preseason and stuff. But yeah, we hugely appreciate you giving up some time to come on. Why don't you let Rush Nation know where they can find you on Twitter, on the interwebs, where your podcast is, absolutely everything you do, shout yourself out.
Well, I appreciate you guys having me, and like I said off the top there, it was nice to talk to some fantasy folks outside of the U.S. You know, we can kind of group ourselves together as that international fantasy community. I like the sound of that. For my content, the Score app, been saying it over and over here, but download the Score app for sure. Follow me on Twitter at Justin Boone. The Score Fantasy Football Podcast. We're doing one episode a week right now. That's going to ramp up as we get closer to the season to more episodes per week. You can find that anywhere. You can find that on the Score app. You can find it in the draft kit, and you can find it on whatever podcast platform you're using, iTunes, Spotify, whatever. So it's out there. Go take a look for that. And yeah, it's you say, not as busy because of the COVID stuff, but really football, we haven't had that much change so far. Now that the preseason isn't going to happen, August might be a little bit lighter for me, some of those nights. But we've been pretty lucky. I really don't know with our, NBA teams and NHL teams. They've had a tough go of it, and they've done a phenomenal job creating content, going back, writing features, analyzing past drafts, and coming up with a lot of creative stuff over the last few months. Whereas with the fantasy and with the NFL stuff, we've kind of just been doing the usual previewing, building the draft kit, and all that sort of thing. So it hasn't been much different yet, but it's about to be, depending when training camps get started here. And if we're not going to have any preseason games, it's going to be a little strange heading into the year, but still a super exciting time. And I'm glad I had the time to sit down with you guys. This was great.
No, we really appreciate it, Justin.
Yeah, we massively do. So yeah, thanks for coming on. Hopefully, maybe you got a spare hour sometime in the future to come back, because we would love to have the international trifecta back together again. But yeah, thanks for your time, buddy, and stay safe out there, because who knows what's going on in the world right now, right?
For sure. And anytime, you guys just let me know. I'd be happy to come back. And yeah, you guys stay safe too.
Thanks, buddy.
Appreciate that.
Murph, I'll catch you Thursday. We've got a special guest, another special guest. Sorry, Justin, that sounded a little derogatory. Not at all. We've got another guest episode Thursday. So, Murph, I'll see you Thursday. Justin, we will talk real soon. Rush Nation, until Thursday, as always, don't forget, keep rushing.